For the last 4 decades, Studs Terkel has been perfecting the art of conversation. He was born in New York City in 1912, but was raised in Chicago and made the city his lifelong home. Trained as a lawyer, he briefly flirted with acting and television, but ultimately settled on a life in radio. In the 1950s, he developed an hour-long radio program on Chicago station WFMT, which would come to define him as the voice of that city. In 1967, he published Division Street America, the first of his oral histories which would chronicle the plight of ordinary Americans. Subsequent books focused on issues such as working, race, and the American dream. His 8 oral histories have won him both the Pulitzer Prize in 1985 for the good war and oral history of World War II and a National Humanities Medal in 1997. This week, he's being honored with the Polk Career Award given by Long Island University. I am pleased to have him on this program again. Welcome back.
Thank you, Charlie. It's been a long time since we first met years ago.
I know, you just reminded me, 25 years ago.
You were working with Bill Moyers at the time.
That's right. Yeah, I do. I remember. And you look like you're going strong and looking
falling
great shape.
apart.
No,
falling
you're
apart.
Not. Yeah. A small note, my sense of condolences for the loss of your wife, which was
Thank you very much.
so close to you and meant so much to you and was such a partner for you. After that, you felt like the work was the only way to get your bearings and to...
Well, of course, work is what it's all about, isn't
Love
it?
and work is...
The book Working, for example. Freud said in Civilization and its discontents, the 2 prime impulses of man, of the human being, is Liebe und Arbeit, love and work, love being sex, of course. Well, many books written about that, more than we need, but very few about work at the time. And so working, of course, is the other prime impulse. And so more or less work is what it's all about. I'm a workaholic, I suppose. They say retirement to me. I'll be hitting 88, May 16th. And retirement, well, I feel like the hero of the Virginian. Remember, Trampus the villain called him a name, and he said, when you say that, smile. When you say, Stud, you're retiring. When you say that, smile. No, toes up is when I'll retire.
This book, I want to talk about, well, I'll talk first.
Yeah.
You're being given an award by LIU. That's a rather impressive award out there. I mean, do these awards mean something to you?
Well, it's pleasant. It's ego-bolstering, I suppose. This is George Polk Award. Polk was that remarkable journalist who was killed mysteriously.
In Greece.
In Greece. And
you and Mike Wallace are going to share the stage out there and talk about the art of conversation and the interview. And
tonight, I hope so, yeah.
That'll be nice.
And, yeah,
review a lifetime of interviewing.
What's that?
Review a lifetime of interviewing.
That's what it'll be, both. We're 2 different worlds, and yet our wavelengths are similar, as yours is, to find out, let's pursue that holy grail we call truth, or what we hope is the truth, what we think is the truth. Basically, that's what it's about.
You worry, though, I know this from you, you worry about journalism today, because you believe that, there's too much corporate consolidation and corporate ownership.
There's that, and of course, trivia has become it, too. I think corporate consolidation and trivia go hand in hand. It keeps us away. You did a program on the CIA uncovering recently.
Right.
And the role it played in overthrowing Mossadegh, legal elected guy in Iran way back, that eventually gave us the Ayatollah via the Shah. Well, today it's being covered. We knew then, Quentin Roosevelt, you recall, was proud of the son of Teddy, was proud of, he headed that mission.
Right.
To overthrow
Kermit
a legally elected government.
Kermit Roosevelt.
Yeah, and Kermit Roosevelt, I'm sorry, Kermit Roosevelt. And then we did the same thing in Guatemala with Jacobo Arbenz, was legally elected. So we do these things, and we've known that for a long time now. I bet if it comes out.
Yeah, but your point is that it comes out later when reporters we should have known about it at the time, or what's your point?
I think there was a hesitancy on the part of media, the establishment media. Yeah, when you say it's in the hands of fewer and fewer, well, think about it now. It's in publishing, it's in the press, it's in TV. Who owns CBS, Westinghouse? Who owns NBC, General Electric? Who owns ABC, Disney? Need we mention our Australian troglodyte, Murdoch? Yeah. So there you have it, you see. So if it's sifted through, now we finally get bits here and there. I'm delighted about what happened in the streets of Seattle.
Oh,
I'm delighted what happened in Washington, D.C.
Why are you delighted?
The students, because suddenly the students, to me, seem like dormant for a long time, ever since Reagan was in. Before that, there were the 60s, which I find as a put-upon area, maligned, much maligned.
The 60s.
The 60s was the one moment young had causes outside themselves, outside of making the big buck. There was civil rights, anti-Vietnam War. They had causes.
Women.
Then came making the big bucks. And now the kids have a cause again, it seems, on campus. They work with the sweatshop conditions.
But characterize what you think their cause is.
The cause?
To put them on the streets in Seattle and put them on the streets in Washington. How would you characterize their cause?
I would say it's a combination. It's interesting. Teamsters, there's been a coalition now, unlikely back in the 60s. For example, you have the AFL-CIO Teamsters with the kids. Now, the kids I know made front page. Some of the flaky kids did. But the fact is, they represented, the others represented something that's missing. A sense of ethics, a sense of morality, connected with the good life. They're not condemning the global economy as such, but it's how it's used.
Well, that's right, they're not. They're basically saying, with all this talk about globalization and all that it's done for people around the world, you know, do we know and are we asking ourselves, what is it doing? What's it really doing to reach out to those who are...
Well, William Grider touches on this, a wonderful journalist I hope you have on someday, William Grider.
Frequently, several times. He writes.
He hits this very often.
First for the Rolling Stone and now for Nation magazine.
That's the guy. Well, he hits it right on the button. You know, unless changes are made, recognize that there's decent pay should be in all these sweatshop joints all over, and the rights of those who are dispossessed to be less dispossessed.
Tell me the story.
Yes, sir.
This is a story from your life.
Yes, sir.
You're waiting at the bus stop.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a guy there who is all nattily dressed about like I am here now. He's got his finest suit on, and his lady is with him, and she's got her finest suit on.
Sometimes anecdotes are very telling. Now, as you can see, I talk a lot. I have a case of logorrhea. Only one guy tops me in logorrhea, and that was the late Hubert Horatio Humphrey.
Yes, he could.
And so I talk to myself. I don't drive a car.
Lyndon Johnson used to say about Hubert Humphrey, he had the fastest connection between his brain and his tongue of any man he'd ever met.
Who?
Johnson said that about Humphrey.
Well, he's right. Well, except that I'm pretty close to that when it comes to logorrhea. So sometimes when I'm waiting for the bus, if no one's there, I talk to myself. And I find the audience very appreciative. And so, but I can't crack this couple. People know me, you know, on the street.
In Chicago.
I talk, and this one couple, very handsome, he's Brooks Brothers and has the Wall Street Journal under his arm, and she's devastating, a looker, you know. Neiman Marcus clothes. She's got the Vanity Fair, of course.
Yeah.
And I can't crack him. My ego is affronted. So I say, Labor Day coming up. You know, the bus is late and coming. He turns, looks at me as there was no old coward looking at a speck on a cuff like that. He turns away. Now my challenge.
Does he recognize you yet?
Well, yes, no. Sort of a goofy old gaffer who talks a lot, but not much respect, you know. And so he turns away, and now the imp of the perverse has me on the hip, and I want to say. So I say, I know it's going to get him mad, bustling. And I say, we used to march on Michigan Boulevard, banners high, UAW-CIO, solidarity forever. He turns back to me and says, we despise unions. I say, oh boy, I got a pigeon here. And there's no bus. And so I say to him, now I'm the ancient mariner. And I fix him with my glittering eye.
You're
and I
honed
say,
in on your target.
Yeah, I say, how many hours a day do you work? It's a non sequitur. He's 8. How come you don't work 18 hours a day? I take a step closer to him. Your great Kramer worked 18. Now, you know why? Because 4 guys got hanged in Chicago fighting for the 8-hour day for you. I refer to something that happened in 1886, the Haymarket Affair. Yeah. And then by this time he's against the mailbox, you know. He can't get away. And she's trembling a little, drops the Vanity Fair. And I'm very courtly, so I pick it up and hand it to her. And then I say, how many hours a week do you work? And he says, 40. And now he's sure there's an old nut here, you know. And the bus is not coming. I said, you know why you work 40 hours and not 80 hours, what your great-grandparents did? Because men and women got their heads busted back in the 30s fighting for the 40-hour day for you. This time they get on the bus. I never see them again. But to this day, I'll bet they're in that condominium that faces the bus stop, upscale one, 35th floor or so. Every day she's looking out the window, and he says, is that old nut still down there? Well, I can't blame them, because what does the media tell us about labor all these years?
Yeah.
Think of there's a feature section. I'm not about Wall Street Journal, all the papers, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post. There's a feature section, sports section, lifestyle section, entertainment section, business section. Is there a labor section? Of course not. So how would they know? That's what I mean when I call it a national Alzheimer's disease. No memory of yesterday. The role labor did play in all these things.
Speaking of that context, who are your heroes?
Here in Chicago, well, everywhere. Clarence Darrow was one of my heroes.
Why Clarence Darrow?
That's why I went to law school. I dreamed of Clarence Darrow.
Oh, you wanted to be Clarence Darrow.
And I woke up to Julius Hoffman. You know, for the young don't know, Julius Hoffman was that judge in the Conspiracy Act, kind of a comic judge.
The guy who was presided over the Chicago
Conspiracy Act, yeah. And so it was not for me. I wasn't. So I became an actor by accident. I was a gangster in radio soap operas. Always the gangster. Whether it be Mary Marlin, who suffered more than St. Teresa ever did, Mondays through Fridays, courtesy of Occidental. Helen Trent, subtitle, Can a Woman Find Love After 35? So I was a gangster in all those.
And when did you start doing the oral histories? And why did you start?
Well, that was accidental. I was interviewing people on this radio station, WFMT. Originally, there were singers, jazzmen, folk singers, and the book called The Spectator. And those people in the book occasionally interview someone like Buster Keaton, who passed through town, or Carol Channing, who
Marlon Brando,
too, who didn't want to talk about his work. So he asked me what I do, and so it became sort of a duel. And it's rather interesting, I thought. And
let me get back to that, but stay with me. We'll come back to this book and who's in here. But go ahead, help me understand how you went from that to oral history, which has defined you and won you a Pulitzer Prize.
Well, it happens to a man named Andre Schifrin, publisher of Pantheon Books at the time.
Right.
And he was forced out when the billionaire took over, what's his name, Newhouse, took over, because he wasn't making enough money. But it was a classy thing. And he formed his own new press. One day he called me up. He saw some of my interviews, of Brando for one, of Bertrand Russell for another, of Fellini for another. He saw these interviews and says, how about you doing a book about a big city, Chicago, and what's happening in the 60s? Because he had put out a book about China and what happened to a small town in China after the revolution. And I said, you out of your mind? So I did Division Street America, and it turns out well. And he says, how about a book about the Great Depression? Young don't know about it. I said, you out of your mind? And he speaks very softly to me. So he convinced me about it. That's how it came about, accidental.
And did you won the Pulitzer for the Good War?
Yeah. And then I guess the National Book Award lifetime thing.
Now, are you surprised by the enormous success of Brokaw's book? Tom Brokaw's book on World War II?
Well, it was good.
Greatest generation?
Well, I guess that particular moment, that era he talks about is the one that's in the Good War to a great extent, Yeah, it's. I think people are hungry for something, a cause. And basically, there was a cause. There were several causes. The Depression, of course, fighting that. And big government, there's one of the ironies. Those who must condemn big government, as Molly Ivins would say, Texans
big
call
government,
it. Big government are the ones whose daddies and granddaddies' asses were saved by big government during the Great Depression.
Or, in fact, they went to school on the GI Bill.
Of course.
The story that there are lots of stories about this, but the notion of you being sort of the poet of the working man and woman in America. I mean, you, in a sense, have given power, microphones, to their eloquence. How do you find it? You sit down with them and...
It's accidental. Sometimes word of mouth. I know I need certain people for the book on working, people who work in various jobs, whether a parking lot attendant, a school teacher, a housewife. But sometimes I got called one day on the radio show, bawled out by this listener. I think it involved race. She said, oh, it's easy for you to say, you sound like my mother. I said, what's your mother's phone number? And the mother turned to me, a woman named Elizabeth Chapin, a marvelous character in the first book. It's accidental. And she was wonderful talking about Chicago. Yeah. Sometimes I was leaving an Appalachian. Many Appalachians came to Chicago from the Deep South, as African Americans did, to work in the steel mills and stockyards. And so it's an Appalachian community in Chicago. I'm leaving the store. The rain is coming down heavily. Luckily, I get in the cab, and I have a heavy tape recorder. You were at the time. And the young driver says, you a journalist or something? I said, oh, sort of. He says, did you see the movie Lord Jim? It's Joseph Conrad novel with Peter O'Toole. I says, yeah. And he says, it's about me. I was a coward, but now I'm strong. That's why I joined the John Birch Society. So I said, I got to get this guy, you know, because so I tell him what I'm doing. So he and I spent 2-3 days together. What I found out was astonishing. It's not all one-dimensional. Even though he was crazily right-wing and all this, and he'd kill anybody who was called red, at the same time, he backed Florence Scala, a friend of mine, for alderman. Wonderful woman, ran. He's one of her strongest backers. Yeah. And he was kicked out as a prison guard because he fraternized with the prisoners, mostly black, sympathetic with them. It's the same kind of guy. So there's no rule of thumb anymore about people and labels. I don't like labels anymore, liberal. I like issues and individuals and what they do, and mostly sense of community, which I think is the key.
This book, The Spectator, Studs Terkel, talk about movies and plays with those who make them. My pleasure to have you back on this program, sir.
It's great.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to see you. It's just, whenever I'm here with you, I think of all these stories, so I thank you. Studs Terkel. We'll be back. Stay with us.